Okay. Hello, David.
Hi, Marilyn. How are you?
Good. So hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is David Woodson. He's, as of just last November, so our brand new Executive Director of Energy, Utilities, and Operations. And he comes to us from the University of British Columbia, but he was a Husky alum and was in a marching band, which makes you a deeply Husky alum. We're going to talk about decarbonization at the UW, and we're going to talk about the technical challenges, why we're doing this, some of the financial barriers we face, and a little bit about social implications of what we're doing. And our goal is this is one of our first efforts to communicate what we're setting out to do to the campus. And there's a note. Okay, I'll get back to saying who the heck am I? First time we're talking about what we're going to do on campus, and also we're going to have 15 minutes at the end to get questions, and we want to know what questions people have, how interested they are in what they want to learn about as the process moves along, and how you'd like to get engaged. And yeah, so be ready to give us your questions here at 45 minutes out. I am Marilyn Osterg, I'm the interim director of the Sustainability Office, and I work with David. Okay.
Awesome. Hi, Marilyn.
Hi. Let's get going. First of all, this is about decarbonization. Let's help people understand why you're the person we're talking to about decarbonization.
All right. Well, thanks, Marilyn. I mean, I think I have the pleasure of doing a job where there's like my own personal values align with what I actually get to do every day. And so in the context of decarbonization, what we have, obviously a big push to reduce greenhouse gas emissions everywhere. And at the University of Washington, what that means is when we look at our scope 1, scope 2 emissions, 90% of them are coming from our steam plant.
We may say what scope 1 and scope 2 are.
So that's those are the direct emissions that we generate ourselves in operating the campus. And so in the steam plant, what we're doing is we take natural gas, a fossil fuel, we're burning that fossil fuel, and that's where our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from. But in burning that natural gas, we're producing steam that we primarily use to heat the buildings on the campus. But there's also a process use of steam for things like sterilization in the hospitals. So there are other demands of the steam as well, but it's primarily used for heating. And so we produce that steam, we then distribute that steam through piping and tunnel systems out to all the buildings. And then at the buildings themselves, there'll be like a heat exchanger where the energy from the steam system gets transferred over into the buildings, what we call their secondary side heating system. And so it's that process of using natural gas to generate steam, to distribute to the campus for the purposes of those heating systems in the buildings. That's our 90% of our scope 1, scope 2 emissions. So if we can find another way to heat the buildings without introducing or releasing carbon into the atmosphere, that's what we talk about when we're wanting to decarbonize the campus.
Thank you. And for people who don't know, because the steam plant's kind of tucked away and out of the way, the visible evidence of the steam plant is the big stack, right?
Yeah.
And what is it that we see coming out of that stack on a
yeah, I mean, that's just obviously that's it's basically water, but it's
and CO2.
And CO2. Right?
Exactly. I guess what we see is the water, right? CO2 is invisible. Okay, so can you characterize like what you started to say we're looking at ways to do this? What do our options look like for how we can stop burning all that fossil fuel?
Yeah, so industry-wise, across North America, whether it's cities or universities, steam systems was what people put in 100 years ago, and but that has changed dramatically, and so it's still district energy. So there's still idea of a central plant and distributed pipes out to buildings, but instead of a central steam system, it's a hot water system. So lower temperature. And the advantages of operating a system at a lower temperature is the ability to tap into other heat sources. So steam operates at such a high temperature. It's very efficient a way of transferring heat, but it also means it's a very efficient way of losing heat as well. So by lowering the temperature for our hot water system, we now get to take advantage of newer technology that exists out there, like water-based heat pumps, and that can operate at a temperature range where we can take low-grade waste heat, of which there can be several different sources, and we can take that low-grade waste heat and lift it up to a temperature that we then distribute that in the same way we pushed out the steam at a certain temperature. Now we push out hot water at a certain temperature, but instead of heating the hot water from natural gas, it's being heated through a heat pump that's tied into a water source. And examples of water sources that are very much front and center for us to consider are Lake Washington, so below the thermal line where you have a relatively steady temperature. We have regional sewer lines that run adjacent to both our plants, or relatively adjacent to both plants. And so that's once again another steady thermal energy source available to us throughout the year. And the third is right here at the plant where we have a cooling system. And part of the cooling system is that when you send cold water out to buildings, it comes back as warmer water, and then use a cooling tower to remove the heat, and you're releasing that heat to the atmosphere. Well, that's a low-grade waste heat. And if you had today's heat pump technology, instead of dumping that waste heat to the atmosphere, we could reclaim that into our heating system. But it kind of, I use the term sort of transformational infrastructure. And I would say that the hot water grid is an example of transformational infrastructure. How we actually heat the water, I've given three examples there, but there could be new technologies 10 years, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. But that hot water grid is the one constant that they would all have. And so as much as we can learn and explore different ways to heat the hot water, that hot water grid is kind of that base piece that we know that we need.
And do you want to say something about like how common is this? Is this cutting edge? Are others doing this?
Well, it's so coming from the University of British Columbia, where we did go through a steam to hot water conversion, where that whole conversation started in 2008, and we had completed the project by 2017. And when we went to our board in 2010, one of the questions that was being asked was, well, who else is doing this? And there really weren't very many examples of that across North America. There had been the city of St. Paul that had done this like 20 years before us, before UBC. And University of Rochester had done a partial conversion. Now those two groups we learned a lot from, but then we also discovered that Stanford was at the same spot as us in terms of the planning process. And that really helped add a lot of confidence to the board at UBC. But what we've seen in the industry is that, 2010, 2011, that was unique. Now, at the International District Energy Association, I was just at their conference in February. It was all about decarbonization. It was one story after the other of university campuses that have either completed or in the middle or at the start of a steam to hot water conversion project. And once again, different approaches for how they heat the hot water, but that common framework. So that is the standard that's out there.
Thank you. Sorry that we're wiggling the camera a little bit. Okay, so what about, okay, we understand we're doing this to decarbonize. What would happen if we did nothing? Like, what's the comparison with not doing this?
Well, I think one of the really kind of fundamental places to start with is recognizing that there's money that we spend anyway every day. So even if we just maintain the existing steam system and infrastructure on campus, we're still going to have to spend money on natural gas. We're going to spend money on electricity, and we're going to spend money replacing boilers and the infrastructure in the plant. And that baseline cost is significant. And so when we evaluate these other options, the question is, well, can we just redirect the funding that we would already invest, but put it towards something that also addresses the carbon question? Like, you know, the steam plant, when you think about it, for the last 100 years, has been absolutely fantastic. It's provided reliable, low-cost heating to the campus. It's done everything, and all the versions of it has done everything the campus could ever have wanted it to do. And but now we're at this pivot point where it's like, well, no, for what needs to happen across the globe in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we need to look to find another way to accomplish the same thing.
And talk a little bit, at some point, I want to sneak in the timeline, like how fast do you think we can do it? And maybe with that, like how much is it going to cost, or is it going to save us money? Talk about the finances in that channel.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the starting point is to try to say, can we redirect existing funds, right? And, you know, on the UBC one, for example, you know, $190 million of deferred maintenance associated with the old steam system. And we spent $90 million to put in a new hot water system. So now were we actually going to spend $190 million on the deferred maintenance of the steam system? Probably not. But just on paper, right off the bat, spending $90 million on a new system that eliminated $190 million of deferred maintenance seems to make a lot of sense. It also turned out that that hot water system was cheaper to operate. It was more efficient, so there were less losses. So when you distribute the steam out to the campus, you're distributing it out at one temperature, one pressure. And so, as I mentioned, it's a very effective way of delivering steam, but if you have a leak or you have different equipment that consume it, it's also very effective at losing. And so what we found was the hot water system was about, you know, we had estimated 20 to 24% more efficient. And so there's a savings there. That's natural gas that you're not having to burn to produce the same amount of energy that's needed on the campus. I think the other part on the financial side is to evaluate how efficient are the buildings in the first place, and what can we do. You know, the first starting point should always be energy conservation, and what we can do with the buildings themselves first, in an effort to reduce how much we need to provide second. But yeah, so but there's also a sense of urgency related to everything here. And so as much as we could sort of, you know, invest in projects that saved energy and then use that savings to reinvest on the next scale, we could do that over an extended period of time. But there's this sense of urgency of doing something quicker and sooner. And I think that's where we would look towards grants at either the federal or state level in an effort to incentivize and drive a quicker change path.
So yeah, our own sustainability action plan goal in the state target is 45% reduction by 2030, 75% by 2040, and 95% by 2050. Are we headed there? Are we going to meet that goal? Do we have a sense of that? Yeah.
I think that's totally reasonable in the context of what we're considering, right? Like, well, steam to hot water conversion combined with energy conservation, and then, you know, all it takes is one play around offsetting natural gas by having, like, I gave the example of a heat pump tied to a water source. That would more than get us beyond that 45% target.
And what if, I asked you this morning, I'm going to ask you again, what if we were like, you know, no holds barred, let's do this as fast as we possibly can? Jump in.
Yeah. Well, I think.
And what stands in the way from us going fast?
Well, I'll start with the second part of that question of kind of what stands in the way. It's like, I think we want to be really thoughtful with respect to what we do. And what I mean by that is take into account, you know, the utility partners that we engage with, whether it's Seattle City Light or Puget Sound Energy, and understanding the sources of where their energy is coming from that we consume.
Mhm.
So, I gave the example of a heat pump. Well, a heat pump consumes electricity. And so, we do that on a large district scale. That's going to put pressure on Seattle City Light. So we need to work with them to have an understanding of where that incremental electricity, that incremental new electricity comes from. And, in the case of Puget Sound Energy, the conversation might be around renewable natural gas. And then the conversation there would be, where does that come from? And so just trying to make sure that we're really thoughtful and that we don't do something that puts other pressures on the system that that makes things worse. So really trying to be cognizant, not just to sort of reduce greenhouse gas emissions at UW, but also do it in a way that is compatible with the agencies that we interact with. So what would we do urgently? So an example, on the scale was, well, we could put an electric boiler into the power plant. Now, look, there's 7 boilers inside the power plant. So I'm not talking about replacing 7 with 7 electric boilers, because that incremental electricity would be unrealistic. That the capital dollar related to do that would be not pragmatic at all. But what if we replace? We could replace 1. And so that's effectively a fuel switch from natural gas to electricity. You could then base load that electric boiler, meaning you ran that all of the time. But there'd be certain times when you wouldn't want to run it. So when you look at the sort of when the campus's electrical profile peaks. And so
just like in the middle of the day.
Right, in the middle of the day, in the end of August or beginning of September, when all the kids are back and it's really warm outside and there's a huge cooling load, that would be a electrical peak. Or in January from electrical heating peak. But just trying to offset, but you could run that boiler over the evening and into the early hours of the morning and not have it put pressure on the electrical infrastructure that we presently have in place on the campus. So the point being is, by doing it smartly, you could actually put that in, order it, install it, and do that in a year and have an immediate reduction of natural gas versus electricity. Now, there's a price associated with it. And there's a reason why people use natural gas boilers and not electrical boilers. And so that would be the downside of that. But, that electric boiler could be part of the long-term solution for winter peaking. So as you offset everything else, so it could provide a role at the beginning and then something you do at the end. So, or that would still have value in your sort of the master plan. But I think what we want to do is not sort of jump in on an item like that, but actually lay out an entire comprehensive plan first to sort of see, okay, what does our end game look like? What are all the pieces of that? And then put them in, and then decide what's the best place to start.
Because that electric boiler would not be anywhere near as efficient as the heat pumps, right? So
right. And so, and another one that we could jump into is say, okay, look, that steam that you produce, it goes out as steam, it goes to the buildings, it transfers the energy, and then after it transfers the energy, it becomes condensate, which is just hot water. Matter of fact, not too different than the hot water system that we're talking about creating. And when you bring that condensate back, well, the advantage of bringing the condensate back to the steam plant is now when you're starting with hot water already into the steam system, that's efficient. That saves burning natural gas to bring that temperature up. Well, we return 90% of that condensate, which is actually really good for a steam system. It's actually fantastic. But it still means we're mixing 90% with 10% of domestic water, which is much dramatically cooler. And then that's our starting point in the steam boilers. So what if we had a heat pump that would have a future use that you use to elevate the temperature of that mixed water, the condensate plus the 10% domestic water, and you lifted that to a temperature, the highest temperature that you could prior to putting it into the boiler. So that's something that we could do. And then you could repurpose that heat pump at a future date. And the only downside, once again, of that heat pump is the electrical consumption that it would have. So you'd still, and then could there be a play on thermal storage that you
Which
can
is-
combine, right? So off-peak, run that heat pump or electric boiler and store that hot water in a very large tank, typically above ground, and then you have that so that during the day when you have the peak electrical issues on the heat pump and the boiler, you don't run them, and you take the heat out of the thermal storage.
And I want to do a time check because I'm not, let's see, good, we're at 2:53 and we're going to, we've got plenty of time left. Yes.
Okay.
And now I want to talk about, in our sustainability action plan, we're wanting to center equity. We're wanting to think about the implications of what we do
Right.
in terms of fairness and costs, who bears the costs. And I realize that's not your area of expertise, but let's just talk to that, like who's going to pay for this and who's going to benefit from it, and can we do something to make it fair?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things that come to mind is, once again, being thoughtful of what we do. So I mentioned earlier, renewable natural gas. Well, a common source of renewable natural gas is landfills. And so, and yes, we can buy that at a premium and use that in lieu of natural gas. And that very much might be a really good answer for peaking energy requirements in the wintertime, and for the process steam that I talked about earlier for things like sterilization equipment that needs steam. But just because we can buy renewable natural gas, just because we can afford it, is that the best use? If it's generated at a landfill, are there other agencies that are adjacent to the landfill that would be better used for? So I think we just need to be cognizant of those types of purchases that we make and whether it really is the best fit for us or for others. So I think that's one piece. I think the second part kind of solves itself from how we in essence finance the project that we do. So my experience at UBC, we funded the steam to hot water project internally from an internal loan, paid back through energy savings over a 30-year period.
So let's expand on that. Paid back through energy savings. That sounds good.
Right. Yeah,
Say
sure.
more about that. Yeah.
Well, and there were two parts. There was the project itself, but the project itself did not generate enough energy savings to pay back the full value of the loan. And so we supplemented that from energy savings from a whole series of energy conservation projects that we had done within the buildings. That the combination of two more than generated enough funds to pay back the loan. And so, but the advantage of having it directed towards a loan payment every year for the next 30 years is a way of having intergenerational equity, so that in essence, everyone's paying the same amount over an extended period of time, as opposed to front-end loading the whole cost of the project onto 1 year or 2 years at the front.
And just to expand on, you said you paid for it with energy savings at UBC.
Yep.
Do we have that potential here, that we can save so much energy in the buildings, we can pay for the project?
Yeah, I think I think the initial look at what our energy use within our buildings are indicates there's definitely an opportunity for large scale energy conservation on the campus. And obviously The biggest one of that is the putting in the hot water system over the steam system.
Yes, yes. I think we're a little early, but I think let's go ahead and start looking at questions from our audience.
Sure.
See what we've got in the chat. So everyone, please. Oops, wow.
Oh, there's a whole
Okay.
bunch of
Yay,
questions.
yay. Okay. That first one was, okay. What does the timeline look like?
Right, you asked
Yeah.
that, and I didn't answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the context of UBC, from idea to completion was 9 years. And I talked about that we actually went fast and slow at times. So there were times, once again, hot water in the early days, we did a pilot project in the first year, and then we took an entire year after the pilot project was complete to assess whether or not we were achieving the energy savings that we thought we were getting before then going deeply into the entire rest of the project. So things like that extended to the timeline on completion. We also thought initially that we were just going to, when you're putting in the new distribution pipes, you're digging up the campus. It's very disruptive. We were only going to do that work in the summertime initially. And what we found was it was too costly to start up and shut down the contractors. And it was more effective to actually start them and have them just carry on through the year. And we would manage the disruptions on campus as the project proceeded. So I think there's opportunities to, I guess the short I'm trying to say is 9 years is what we did at UBC. I think we can do it in a shorter period of time. I think 2030 is a reasonable goal.
I noticed another question of would the system still run on natural gas, and UBC still does. Would ours?
So we built 2 plants at UBC. We built a natural gas plant for basically ensuring that there was enough capacity in the peaking of the winter. And then we also built a bioenergy plant.
Which means?
UBC is using clean wood waste that's left over from mills and from furniture manufacturers. It turns out there's actually quite a significant amount of wood furniture manufacturers, even in like Whatcom County and Skagit County, and a lot of that waste wood gets collected and makes its way up into UBC's system. And so what they do is they gasify that wood waste to create a slipstream of syngas. Now I'm getting way too technical, but in essence, they use that syngas offsets natural gas.
And you see that as a potential option here, or that was something that made sense?
Well, it is an option, but it's an option that comes with a lot of questions around it. So, which we got in spades at UBC. So, for example, I use the words purposefully clean wood waste, right? So they're not using construction wood waste from construction sites that's got paints and nails, because the paint has a whole different emissions profile related to it, which UBC was trying to avoid. And the second part is that it's wood waste. So it's not forest and land use issues where forests are being specifically grown to create woody biomass that goes into their plant. They're taking waste wood from other processes that, if left to its own, is going to release methane, which is even worse than CO2, into the atmosphere. And instead, they're taking it, and the last controversial piece is that they take that wood waste and they put it through that process. They're still releasing CO2, but it's considered biogenic CO2 because it's CO2 that would have made it into the atmosphere anyway because of the process. The controversy is, but we're at a point in time in the world where we don't want to be accelerating the amount of CO2 that's going into the atmosphere. And is that, and there's a debate there of, is that making it worse, or is it not relevant because the CO2 is going to come off the waste would anyway.
Mhm,
So every option
mhm,
has some element of uh, detail like that related to it,
mhm,
and we just need to be thoughtful
mhm,
uh, prior to proceeding on what choices we make.
mhm, mhm. Um, And I mean, I just want to be clear about the vision you were talking about with the heat pumps and the waste heat. That's not natural gas based, that's electricity based.
Yeah, well, and there are natural gas heat pumps, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about
right.
electrical based heat pumps.
Yeah, so that's essentially what
Well,
we're looking for, but with some
and-
options.
And what's driving that is this understanding that Seattle City Light, 90% of their electricity is coming from green sources,
Mhm,
and the remaining 10% is on offsets that they've purchased.
mhm,
So on the surface, it's 100% green, which is
mhm,
fantastic.
mhm,
That would drive us towards wanting to electrify.
mhm,
But what we really have to be cautious and what we have to work hand in hand with them on is, well, where does the incremental new electricity come
Mhm,
from
mhm.
and what does it look like?
mhm,
And before we start making investments in grand infrastructure that creates a significant electrical demand on the campus,
mhm,
we need to
mhm.
understand, well,
Yeah.
if that electricity is coming from a coal-fired electrical plant,
Mhm,
then
mhm,
we've kind of
Mhm,
actually gone
mhm,
backwards
mhm.
in what we're trying to achieve. So that's what I mean by
Yeah,
just being
keep-
thoughtful.
yeah.
And
Keep the very big picture in mind.
yeah, and
Yeah.
we gotta work with our partners. That's one question. Timeline. Maybe there was two.
Oops. You say the water would be heated through a heat pump in order to heat the buildings. Does the energy that heats the water come from environmentally friendly sources? You kind of addressed that right now, but did you want to add to that? And how does this compare to other universities? And what do you think is the best long-term renewable energy source?
Oh. Well, so I think the element is that the sources can change over time as different technology plays itself. And I think each location has to look at what is readily available to itself. Geothermal is a very popular option right now, like the conference I made reference to in February. But there were a lot of presentations where it was a hot water distribution system tied to a geothermal field. But there's some unique things here in our local environment for us to take into account. I mentioned obviously the lake, and that's a bit of a longer term play, but it's absolutely something that has to be considered given the proximity to the campus.
Why don't you say more about that? Because that's very unintuitive at the
Sure.
surface, that we can
Okay.
draw heat deep out of.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, the idea is that like all these sources, whether it's the lake, the sewer, or the cooling towers here at the plant, what you're looking for is a temperature source that is constant 12 months out of the year. Or it might have slight variation, but you're looking for that constant temperature. And because that allows the heat pumps to run very effectively. They're not very happy when temperatures drop below freezing, for example, on an air source heat pump. So that's kind of what's driving me and my thought process around a water source heat pump. In the case of the lake, when you get below in a deep lake, which we have here at Lake Washington, when you get below what's sort of the thermocline, that's where you're getting into that steady temperature. Now, there may be some variation between winter and summer, but it's not enough that would take away from that opportunity of pulling cold water from the deeper part of the lake, but having that, it's the more important piece is that steady temperature of the water. And same thing with the sewer lines. At UBC, we actually talked about one time, there was a sewer treatment plant that was 8 kilometers away and had an arm of the Fraser River that was in between. And we were talking about running a pipeline to take that heat from the sewer treatment facility all the way back to the campus. And part of the driver there is like, okay, really, you're going to run a pipe under the river to get it there? It was very epic type solution to consider. but when you also look at the environmental impacts of what was presently happening with the heat that was in the sewer water. So even though the sewer treatment facility dealt with cleaning the water to a point where it could be put into the ocean, the heat still gets transferred along and went into the ocean. So there was an environmental gain to be had to extract that heat and then bring it back to our campus. But it was 8 kilometers away and under a river. Here, the 2 regional sewer lines run almost, well, one is right on this, under the street beside our Western Campus utility plant. It couldn't be any closer. And the second one is runs along the Brick-Gilman Trail that goes right beside the old original campus utility plant. So to not consider those 2 options when you have that type of proximity, that's why those ones jump out. And yeah, they're kind of unique to us because not every campus would have the advantage of having those types of sources right there. So
they're pulling sewage from a large area, not just from
Right,
campus.
right, and a fairly steady temperature. So there might be seasonal variation of it, but once again, it's a steady enough temperature throughout the year to take advantage of onto the campus. Did I get that
I
one?
think so.
Okay, all
I
right,
think
let's
so.
jump to
Yeah.
the next question.
Good stuff. Whoops. Would it cost a lot initially to train the employees for renewable energy as well as infrastructure and equipment? So I guess that's, like,
Oh my gosh, there's so many layers to this. So like even at UBC, for example, when we went to hot water, we specifically called for this thin-walled European hot water pipes, because hot water systems are very common in Europe and they've been there for decades, not common in North America. And so bringing those pipe systems here, it meant that we needed to train not just our employees, but also the contractors that we were using on how to weld the thin wall pipe. So yeah, so it's a great question because there's so many layers to this around getting people familiar with it. I think the part that's exciting about it is that the folks that work with energy systems, that's their background, is energy systems. And so it's exciting to actually have more than one to learn from and to work on. And and that's what we envision here. So I think that excitement of doing something unique, like once again, back to UBC and the bioenergy plant, the folks that ran that plant were extremely proud to be there and to be a part of making a difference, not just on the campus, but in terms of what we all need to do personally.
There's a recent question about student involvement. Yeah, okay. So, good. All these questions, we will definitely read over this, but maybe not get all of them. Let's see, where's the one that's about student? I'm not finding it immediately.
Okay, well, you look for the question.
Yeah.
I'll just kind of talk in general.
Sure.
That so even there was an article that went out today on the UW system, and I've already got a couple of emails from folks who expressed interest of saying, hey, look, I have a history with dealing with energy systems in either a previous job or previous part of my life. And I think sort of one commonality, I speak to my own sort of personal values. I think a lot of people have personal values in this front and want to be able to make a difference. And I think part of doing an interview like this is we're trying to call out to you all to raise your hand and say, yeah, hey, Dave, I'm either interested or I have ideas. And I would like to find a way to be more engaged in this process. A quote that I got from a friend a couple months ago that I keep using all the time is, none of us is as smart as all of us. And I think that goes with this too. As much as I've had the pleasure of having this great experience and what I've done at UBC's campus and getting to apply it here, I'm more than open to learn ideas and learn new things and share things. But, were you able to find the question?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
and you kind of answered it, but also, yeah, how can students get involved? How will you incorporate student opinions into decarbonization?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one is just ask for you to raise your hand.
And maybe how do they do that? You know, they can just stand out there.
Well, I hope we'll have links on here with emails for people to reach out to. I think, we're also trying to, Marilyn and I, and working together, are trying to, I'm shaking the table. Marilyn and I, working together on ways to engage the campus more broadly. I think back to, as much as we did all these great things at UBC, one of the things that we didn't do so well was share the story along with the campus. And I think more people knew about what UBC did outside of the campus than on the campus. And that's one of the things that you and I have talked about, of saying, okay, well, how can we create a platform for engaging people? And there's more than one way to do this. This is a start. And I guess what I'm saying right now is we want to do that engagement. We want to find ways to have those student voices be a part of this, and so that you can take pride in what the campus is doing.
Some models out there. Well, one was like your X Prize, where you actually
Right.
NBC.
Yeah, I know. So I mean, yeah, there were some things that we did. Well, we did like a on-campus conference where we had different speakers that were either professors or staff speaking to elements. I actually gave a presentation. It was like the early days of like, hey, here's the problem around our scope 1, scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions, which, oh, by the way, if I were to like dust off the presentation, it would almost work perfectly for this campus too. But yeah, so we had this internal conference. That was one way in which we engaged folks. And the second was this, we did a X project where we just laid out the scope of the problem in general and asked for people to submit their ideas. And we offered a reward. And we gave like 4 first place prizes of $2,500. And I think we got like 90 some odd submissions, and it was from staff, faculty, students, graduates. One of the more interesting one actually wasn't a submission, but we got a letter from the former power plant chief who ran the plant in the 60s when it converted from coal to natural gas. And so when we got his letter, we invited him out to the campus and did a tour of the plant. And, so this is like 2010, 2011 timeframe. And he was like, I can't believe this thing is still running. How come we haven't renewed it already? But yeah, so really neat. So that's an idea of something that we could do.
And another idea I saw that if there are faculty out here, an idea was a course where they focused on campus energy transformation. This was at Carleton College, and class projects, students.
Right. Yeah, totally. So looking for opportunities for capstone projects, right? Like, maybe the whole thing is sort of too large for something like that, but maybe there's pieces of pilot projects that could be spun off into capstone projects for classes. That would be perfect.
Cool. Right. On time. Oh yeah, we still got 50 minutes. Great. Okay. Here's an interesting one. Okay, wait. I guess it doesn't matter if they're not in order. How much of UW's total power is supplied by the power plant? There's a chance that explain why it's called the power plant.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, typically steam it's a form of power, but the confusion that can be created is that when someone thinks of a power plant, you're thinking of electrical generation. Our plant primarily produces steam for the purposes of heat and has chillers that produce cool water for the purposes of cooling down our buildings on our campus. Now, for those that know, inside the power plant, we also do have the ability to generate electricity, but it's really for the purposes of generating the electricity to maintain the operation of the plant itself, so that it has reliable steam generation. Because we never want to be in a situation where we're unable to provide heat because there's no electricity at the plant. So the plant is self-sufficient, independent of whether there's an outage from Seattle City Light, for example. But its primary purpose is not generating electricity, it's generating steam for the purposes of heat.
And is it, like if you convert it all to BTUs, do you know like how much of our energy comes in the form of electricity versus natural gas?
Not off the top of my head. I'd have to get back to you on that one.
Okay.
I was trying to stay away from
Next-
numbers, Meryl.
Yeah, sorry. For people interested in following up, that was from Damon. I think that's the one I read. How can energy efficient improvements in new and existing buildings impact the scope of the central power plant transformation? So if we can get our buildings efficient.
Yeah,
how to
well,
make a smaller power plant.
right. So one is that's everyone talks about these projects and where's the money going to come from? And I think that the first place where money should come from is the money we spend already. So if we're already spending money on electricity and gas in existing buildings, as we make those more efficient, then that's less money we're spending on those commodities for that process. And then we need the ability to, in essence, quantify that savings to redirect it towards the large scale projects.
But also, like, if the buildings are more efficient, the plant doesn't have to be as big, right?
No, exactly,
Yeah,
right. And that is a bit of a harder debate. And myself and one of my very fond of professor at UBC, a gentleman named John Robinson, at the early debate, that he was very much, no, you got to focus on, the demand side first, make the buildings more efficient first before you size your central infrastructure, because you run the risk of oversizing it. And the compromise was the speed, because if you wait to optimize 200 buildings on the campus before you make your infrastructure play on the main campus infrastructure, you run the risk of it taking way too long. So how do you find that happy medium of trying to size the plant, recognizing that you're doing this efficiency play at the same time?
Let's see, you mentioned that electrification of boilers would heavily burden Seattle City Light. What does that look like in terms of comparing it to the campus's current energy consumption from the grid? Yeah, so like how much increase would it be?
Right, so
Electric
trying to stay away from numbers, but it's at scale. So if we're our peak of like 52 megawatts of electricity right now, and if we're talking 8 megawatt heat pump, that's what's 8 over 52? That's right. It's like a sixth of it, about 15% or so.
Well, and that's
going to call
boiler.
But you do
if
boiler heat pump, it would be a similar electrical. That's what I'm having in my mind, but in terms of like the electrical consumption and just trying to get a flavor of what the relative amount of that is. Once again, if you didn't run it at peak times, then that changes the impact that it would have on our own infrastructure, let alone Seattle City Lights. We're gonna have fun going through all these questions.
Yeah, we will. And let me see what are, okay, good. We still have 9 minutes. Do changes to the operations of the UW power plant or new power plant initiatives require approval from someone like the president?
Of course. Yes, and
Lots
the
of
and the
work.
Board of Regents. No, absolutely,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And I think part of the exercise that we have in front of us is to, these are complex systems, not just in the energy that we buy and how we buy it and how it's run and how it's consumed on the campus. But there needs to be an understanding of how the present systems operate, in essence, the status quo,
Mhm,
and then what we're proposing to change and to do.
mhm,
And also trying to, as I mentioned, identify that the transformational infrastructure, and then identify what are sort of the opportunistic pieces that we add to that over time, which may change,
mhm,
right? Like,
mhm, mhm,
who knows? Nuclear fusion might be a
mhm,
real
mhm,
answer,
mhm,
5 years from now or
Mhm,
10 years from
mhm.
now. It isn't today,
mhm, mhm,
but it might be in the future,
So we want to be ready. if
right?
that's a good
Right. And
option.
so that's the idea, is like, okay, well, what are the choices we make today that don't preclude something like that of being something that we add to our portfolio in the future?
Mhm. And and when I read this question, I think of a slide you made where you sort of talked about our pathway. And at the end, you have, we engage everyone in this
Ah.
once in a lifetime transformation. Do you want to speak to, it's like, we really need everyone on board, right? Because this is a heavy lift. Or do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, well, I think the part that comes to mind is think of when the campus was first formed, and what one of the first buildings that was built was the steam plant,
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
right?
mhm,
And so now, fair enough, I think there's actually been about 4 different versions of the steam plant
Mhm,
built since then, and a bunch of them were in subsequent orders in the early days. Mark Kirschenbaum, who runs our steam plant, tells a really good story about that. But the point being is, it's a fundamental piece of infrastructure from the beginning days of the campus. And the opportunity that is really exciting in front of us right here is the fact that the steam plant's done what it's done for the last 100 years. And we have this opportunity right now to take a step back and, in essence, put together the utility infrastructure master plan of that transformational infrastructure that will be in place for the campus for the next 100 years.
mhm,
And so that's the neat opportunity. And driven by decarbonization, but aided by energy conservation and being smart about how we run our campus and being efficient that way. But that's the opportunity to get everyone's engagement on, because what a great sort of perspective to have for the campus looking forward.
mhm, mhm, mhm. We're lucky to be here at this time.
Exactly.
Let's see. How has making UW a more accessible campus been considered in conjunction with this? Since the campus already has to be torn up, it would be a great time to build more ramps and improve the campus in general.
What a great observation and question and comment. And I think the principle that I put on this is that sometimes the way to solve a problem is to make it bigger. Because you're absolutely right. To put in the new hot water distribution piping, we're going to need to dig up the campus. And we're not going to dig it all up at the same time, I promise. But there's an opportunity here to be smart about how we do that, and to take advantage of that and make it even better. Now, the University of Washington is a beautiful campus to begin with. But an example, but there's opportunities here to make things better, as the question has highlighted. And at UBC, one of the things that we had done was there was a public realm improvement project that happened in parallel with the energy project. And so we put the pipes in the ground, and they did this absolutely wonderful public realm project over top of it of new pavers, new lighting, and different improvements along the way. And it was great. And people got the benefit of the improved look and feel of the campus, although the standard's high here already. And but then knowing that there was this transformational energy system underneath it.
Mhm, mhm. Very cool. Okay. How will you incorporate student opinions in decarbonization? You kind of answered it, but do you have any more thoughts on it?
Well, we're going to look for multiple ways, and I think this is what you and I and others within sustainability and the energy teams are going to be working on. We've given a couple examples, but we're open to other ideas as well. I see it as being very important to be able to get those thoughts out there and share them. And frankly, some of it is just an understanding. Having a conversation and learning both ways with respect to why certain systems run the way they do, and what are the consideration factors that we put into it. What's interesting about when you talk about alternative energy and changes, and you're thinking of well, how much risk do we take in putting these things in place, and part of this is, we don't want any risk. I mean, the utilities business, it's a risk adverse operation. Like, we take pride in the fact that we deliver the energy systems with no disruption. Like, that's our goal. But to do things differently, to make the changes that we need to make, we need to create a safe space to try new and different things. And so trying to find that right balance between risk adverse, redundant, resilient energy production and delivery, and a space for trial and error. That's our perfect end game, to have a mix of both.
Let's see, 2 minutes. Yes, 2 minutes to go. Shall we take one more question really quick, or do you have some final thoughts you want to? Here's a cool one. How does the power plant affect people living around it?
Well, I mean, there's the emissions, right? So, I mean, the greenhouse gas emissions exactly from the stack. And so as we take steps to reduce that dramatically, that's going to improve air quality. Now, the plant is run in an efficient way in the beginning, and it's very cognizant. It runs under an air permit in the first place, but there's no denying the fact that if we reduce the carbon through changing the way in which we heat buildings on the campus, we will improve the air quality in the region.
Great. Thanks, everyone, and stay tuned for more.
Yeah, awesome. And I look forward to hearing from people. I freely welcome emails. If people have questions or follow up, or your question didn't get answered as part of this. And like I said, I had some people reach out to me already this morning saying, hey, Dave, love to have a coffee with you sometime and bounce some ideas. I will do that as much as I possibly can, because I get a lot out of those interactions, and I will try to do that. I realize I might be stretching myself thin in that context, but more than willing to do that.
So we're giving your email?
Yeah, absolutely.
dwoodson@uw.edu.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Marilyn.
Yeah,
thanks for doing this. It was fun.
Yeah.